All right. Hi. This is my modern poetry project by Brandon Harris. I did it on three poems: "The Red Wheelbarrow" by William Carlos Williams, "Penelope" by Dorothy Parker, and "If We Must Die" by Claude McKay. So the first poem is "The Red Wheelbarrow." Um, William Carlos Williams, the author of this poem, was born in 1883. He grew up in a mixed home with a Puerto Rican father and a British mother. But oddly enough, none of that mattered because he grew up in New Jersey. Yeah. So that happened. And then he ended up not staying in New Jersey. He actually ended up going to the University of Pennsylvania. Um, After that, he went to the University of Pennsylvania for doctor. His first book of poems was published in 1909. Great, great author. He was not only a poet. No, no, no. It's not that simple. Um, he was a doctor that delivered more than 2,000 babies. Now, that's a lot of children, a lot of potential doctors and chemists and pilots. That's a lot of babies. But sadly, the great doctor author died in 1963. One of the unknown terms to this simple poem was glazed, covered with a smooth, glossy coating. The literary device of this entire poem was basically imagery. And the effect was that it caused the reader to imagine what the wheelbarrow looked like, also other details the reader might think of, like the grass and the trees and the sky, and just other like minor details that the author might not have put in. Um, Like I said earlier, this poem is fairly short and simple, and the author is basically depicting a stationary wheelbarrow that may have once been used to do many things to support a family, such as carry food, shovel things. It could have been used for anything that could have helped this family survive. The tone is very nostalgic just for the fact that it takes you back to a simpler time where people kind of used wheelbarrows more often than nowadays. Um, the theme is simplicity is bliss. Just because the poem is simple and can be analyzed many ways depending on the reader's point of view. Like, another point is that the reader could have taken this as the wheelbarrow is symbolic to the way of life of how people just constantly struggled and how like they constantly used objects to save their lives. Like a wheelbarrow could be used to save a person's life. A modern element is free verse, and the reason it's free verse is that it has no pattern to it, and it kind of is a rewrite of life back then, because life then wasn't all it's going to happen this way, and this way. It was kind of all over the place, kind of just like we're gonna string this here and string that there, and hope it turns out for the best. So that's the red wheelbarrow, and that's basically what someone came up with for it. There's the citation, and so that's the red wheelbarrow. The next poem is Penelope. Okay, so a little backstory before we get to anything else of the poem is that this poem is basically a write off of the story Odysseus, or not Odysseus, the Odyssey. My bad. Odysseus was the main character, he was the soldier. Penelope is the wife of Odysseus. Now, she was extremely brave throughout this, even though it wasn't recognized. Because she stayed faithful to her husband, even though she was followed by many, many, many suitors. Okay, so Dorothy Parker, the great author of this poem, was born in 1893. Her cunning wit is what made her, not made her, but is one of the key things that helped her to be famous, and but also made her very, very feared because people didn't know what she was gonna say. She chaired an anti-fascist committee during the Spanish War, and she also gave most of her money away to Martin Luther King to help his cause. Um, one of her regrets at the end of her life was her snide comments because she was just trying to be cute and just trying to like make jokes and stuff like that, but it didn't turn out that way. They turned out very rude and very like snide. Um, and sadly, she died in 1967. So that was Dorothy. That was a little backstory of Dorothy Parker. An unknown term to this that many people might not know is heed, and it means to pay attention to or to take notice of. Especially when it comes to advice or warnings. You especially want to do this if you encounter a witch. A literary device of the poem is personification. The reason being is that in line 2, she kind of describes the sea as having a footprint, and last time I checked, the ocean does not have feet. This poem is basically showing women back then in Greece had so much to do, such as cooking, cleaning, laundry, watching the children, etc. And all this was going on while their husbands were off at war or dying, and they were just trying to keep themselves from going mad. And she talks about what he does and how they call him brave, but she gets no credit at all for staying strong and keeping her head together throughout this whole ordeal. There were two tones to this, and it was envy and respect. The reason it was envious is because she was stuck at home doing tedious chores and just being boring while her husband was off having fun and being adventurous and doing so many exciting things, even though it was very, very dangerous. Do not try this at home. But she is very respectful because she calls him brave and she still loves him because she is still his wife. And as I said before, there were suitors after her, many, many suitors, because they didn't think her husband was going to come back, because who knows, on the high seas, the boat might get capsized or something horrible might happen, which many of them hoped for, but she still remained faithful. She used many themes in this, and it all depend on the reader's point of view, but for this, it was a lot about longing, spousal duties, and that it isn't being easy being a soldier's wife. And it's because she wants her husband to come home. She's longing for him to be safe and for him to come back into her arms. And it's tough being married to a soldier because you don't know what's going to happen. One minute you could be talking to them and everything could be fine, and the next thing you know, you never hear from them again, and then you get a knock on your door and they are gone. And this is a very sad fact, but it is a many risk that many people take. And so to the soldiers. A modern element for this was fragmentation, just because the lines are strange. First, it starts off with the personification of the ocean and how it leaves footprints. And then it goes to normality of life, like chores and housework and being a homemaker. And then it ends with talking about how he's the one being called brave, which I find very, very strange because she was really brave herself. And it still seems to make sense somehow, even though the lines themselves aren't together that well. But the poem is still very nice. And that's kind of Penelope right there, doing her housework, linen, sewing, and that would be her suitors, the guys who are after her hearts and trying to make her cheat on her husband. There is the citation for where I found this image. The next poem is If We Must Die. Dun dun dun. Okay, all serious. This was by Claude McKay. Interesting, Claude McKay was born in Jamaica in 1890, where he was raised. See, immigrant. He came to the United States 22, young man. One of the most surprising facts to him was the racial discrimination at the time. Like, really, slavery was over, but still, colored people were still being pushed into separate schools and were still being treated rather poorly. And this was not a very proud moment in American history. At the age of 26, he fell on hard times supporting himself because he couldn't really find a job and he couldn't really keep one. So he had a hard time making money. His poems did, however, grow to be very, very popular, and this is one of his popular poems. But sadly, his fiction and nonfiction stories did not. Guys. Claude McKay spent a lot of his life countering racial discrimination just because he didn't see it as fair that they were separated, because in the Declaration of Independence it says all men are created equal. It doesn't say specifically white man. But sadly, as all great artists come to the end, he died in 1948. An interesting term that was unknown to many is kinsman, and it's basically a man who is related to a person by blood. A literary device of "if we must die" was a metaphor because he's using dogs to describe the men. He's saying that the men are vicious packs of dogs, and he does this to stir not only fear into the reader, but also to captivate the reader and to kind of keep their attention throughout the poem. But he also compares them to a pack of dogs due to the phrase dogs of war, and this has to do with like Romans and Greeks. This poem was all about camaraderie. Like, the speaker was trying to tell his brothers in arms not to give up, not to give in to the fear of, oh my gosh, we're going to die, we've got to get out of here. And in lines 5 through 8, he's trying to tell the reader about how they died honorably. Like, they didn't run away and they survived. They didn't survive, they died. My bad. But they didn't give up, and that's very honorable. In the last lines, he's trying to rally his men, telling them that, yeah, the fight cannot be won, and yeah, they're all going to die, but die like men. Don't die like cowards. That's really, really bad. The tone is very inspirational, though, because it gives hope to the hopeless, and it instills a sense of not giving up and to just keep on going even though it's really hard. And he knows the situation is completely hopeless and that they should give up, but he doesn't want them to because he wants them to go out with dignity. A theme is honor, because throughout the course of the poem, the speaker is saying that they shouldn't die with their tails between their legs. Dog reference, by the way. And that they need to go out fighting. And he says this until their last breath, which means that he wants them to keep going until they can't anymore and until they just die. A modern element of this was destructive modernism due to the fact that men are dying and the war is going on. Men losing their lives in a war that cannot be won, and this kind of just destroys the American dream, because the American dream is everything's happy and fun and awesome and just like everyone's gonna be amazing. No, not the case with Americans at all. These men lost their lives in a pointless, hopeless war, and at least they did it honorably and they didn't give up at all. And this kind of a picture of the men in arms, and they're kind of just standing in poses of like, yeah, we're gonna keep fighting, and yeah, we're here, so deal with it. And it's just a picture that displays the poem very, very nicely. There is the citation. And this was my modern poetry. This was my modern poetry project. I hope you enjoyed it, and see you later.